History books claim Abraham Lincoln came from a simple line of Kentucky pioneers living in a one-room log cabin.
Where was Abraham Lincoln born? Well, the history books we all read in school tell us Kentucky. A lot of people, including some historians, though, question whether that is true.
But science just caught up with a secret the 16th president tried to bury forever. New genetic evidence from 2015 and 2025 has uncovered a signature in his blood that should not be there. It is a marker so rare that it only appears in 5 out of every 10,000 people on the entire planet. This discovery changes everything we thought we knew about the woman who gave him life and the hidden world she truly came from. Rare signature in Lincoln blood. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809. Everyone knows the setting, which was a tiny one-room log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky. His parents were Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Hanks Lincoln. For over 150 years, people thought they knew everything about this family. They were seen as the ultimate example of the American pioneer spirit. But here is the deal. There were always rumors about where Nancy Hanks actually came from. Even Lincoln himself was very mysterious about it. He once told his law partner that his mother was illegitimate. He said she was the daughter of a nobleman from Virginia. This was a heavy secret for a man in his position to carry. For decades, historians argued about this. They searched through old, dusty court records and family Bibles. Some said she was the daughter of Lucy Hanks. Others said she belonged to a different branch of the family altogether. But see, paper records from the 1700s are often messy or missing. It was a total stalemate until the year 2015. That is when the Hanks DNA project decided to use modern science to solve the mystery once and for all. They used something called mitochondrial DNA. This is a special kind of genetic material that is only passed down from a mother to her children. It stays the same for thousands of years. This allows scientists to trace a direct line back through time. They tested living people who are descended from the same female line as Nancy Hanks. What they found blew the doors off the history books. They discovered that Lincoln's mother belonged to a haplogroup called X1C. Now, a lot of people are confused about what that means. Basically, most people of European descent belong to common groups like H or U. But X1C is different. It is incredibly rare. We are talking about something that only appears in about 5 out of every 10,000 people on Earth. Hands down, this is one of the most overlooked aspects of Lincoln's life. This marker does not fit the typical profile of a British or German pioneer. It points to a very specific and very ancient origin in the Middle East. Specifically, it traces back to the Levant region. This includes places like modern-day Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon. The crazy part is that this DNA signature started forming around 7,000 years before the Common Era. It was moving through the world long before the United States even existed. People are obsessed with the idea of Lincoln being a common man of the people. But his DNA says he was part of one of the most exclusive and mysterious genetic groups in human history. This discovery was announced on October 21, 2015. It was the 150th anniversary of his death. The timing could not have been more perfect. Researchers from a company called Family Tree DNA were the ones who broke the news. They compared the DNA of many different descendants. They wanted to make sure there was no mistake. Every single person in that maternal line had the exact same rare signature. This proved that Nancy Hanks was indeed the daughter of Lucy Hanks. But it also proved that their ancestors had a journey that was much longer than a trip from Virginia to Kentucky. They were carrying the blood of ancient civilizations in their veins. This is a key detail because it changes how we look at the entire Lincoln family. They were not just random settlers in the woods. They were carriers of a genetic legacy that survived for thousands of years against all odds. But here is the catch, because knowing the name of the gene is only half of the story. Secret history of President's mother. To understand why this DNA is so disturbing, we have to look at the life of Nancy Hanks. She was a woman of mystery even during her own time. She was born around 1784 and lived a very hard life. She died at the young age of 34 from something called milk sickness. This happened when cows ate a poisonous plant called white snakeroot and people drank the milk. It was a terrible way to go. She left behind her husband Thomas and her children, including young Abraham. But before she died, she lived in a world of secrets. See, back in the 1700s, that being born out of wedlock was a huge scandal. It was something people tried to hide at all costs. There are court records from Mercer County, Kentucky, from around 1790. They show that Nancy's mother, Lucy Hanks, was actually charged with a crime for having a child without being married. This was a very big deal back then. Eventually, Lucy married a man named Henry Sparrow. Nancy grew up in a house that was full of whispers. A lot of people believe this is why Abraham Lincoln was so melancholy and sad. He felt the weight of his mother's past. He once asked his law partner, William Herndon, to keep his mother's origins a secret. He was afraid that the public would judge him if they knew he came from an illegitimate line. But what Lincoln didn't know was that the scandal wasn't just about a missed marriage certificate. It was about a bloodline that was totally unique. The DNA evidence confirms the illegitimacy that Lincoln feared. It proves he was right about his grandmother Lucy. But it adds a layer of mystery that he never could have imagined. What most people do not realize is that the Hanks family was moving through a very specific part of Virginia before they went to Kentucky. They were living in areas where people from all over the world were starting to mix. If the DNA traces back to the Levant, how did it get to a poor family in the American wilderness? Some researchers think it might have come through early traders or explorers who reached the shores of the colonies long before the big waves of migration. Others think it might be connected to a specific group of people called the Druze. The Druze are a small religious group in the Middle East who have stayed very isolated for a long time. They have some of the highest levels of haplogroup X in the world. It is a group that stays within its own community. So, for this DNA to end up in the American South is truly a wild twist. It suggests that someone in the family tree was a traveler or an outsider who brought this rare code into the pioneer population. This is not just a story about a president. It is a story about how humans move and hide their tracks. One of the most overlooked aspects of this is how much Lincoln looked like his mother. People often described him as having a very unique look. He was very tall with dark features and a very distinct face. Some people even rumored back then that he had different ancestry. They were looking at his physical traits and guessing, but now we have the data to back it up. Nancy Hanks was the bridge between a mysterious past and a world-changing future. She carried this rare Levant marker through the poverty of the frontier and passed it to the man who would save the Union. And get this. The DNA study actually cleared up a lot of confusion. Before 2015, there were two different women named Nancy Hanks that people argued about. One was the daughter of Lucy, and the other was from a different family line. The DNA test proved that the other line had a totally different and very common European signature. This means the disturbing and rare X1C marker is the only true link to the president. It locks him into a specific story that is far more complex than any history book ever allowed. But as rare as this blood is, the actual path it took to get to America is even more unbelievable. Desert blood. In Civil War leader. So, let's talk about the Levant. This is a region that has seen the rise and fall of the greatest empires in history. We are talking about the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, and the early Jewish tribes. This is where the X1C haplogroup began its journey. It is a lineage that is deeply tied to the ancient Near East. Most people who have European roots are part of groups that moved north and west after the last ice age. But X1C stayed behind or moved in very small, isolated groups. It is so rare that even in the Middle East today, it is hard to find. Finding it in a log cabin in Kentucky is like finding a diamond in a bag of coal. It just does not belong there according to the usual rules of history. This marker branched off from its ancestors about 13,000 years ago. It formed its own unique identity around 7,000 years ago. That means for thousands of years, women were passing this specific code down through generations of daughters. They survived wars, famines, and migrations. Somehow, one of those women ended up in the American colonies in the 1700s. Think about the journey that required. It might have been a woman who was a servant, a traveler, or someone fleeing persecution. Nobody expected this to happen, but it did. The data shows that this haplogroup appears in places like Spain, Jordan, and Tunisia. This suggests a Mediterranean path. Maybe an ancestor was a Spanish explorer or a sailor from the Middle East. Whatever the case, they brought a piece of the ancient world to the hills of Virginia. When Nancy Hanks was born, she had no idea she was a walking time capsule. She was living in a place with no schools and very little medicine. She was struggling to survive in a world of dirt floors and heavy labor. But inside her cells, she carried a code that was shared by people who built the first cities in human history. It is a powerful contrast. You have the humble, poor life of a pioneer woman on one side. On the other side, you have a genetic link to the cradle of civilization. This is why many are not seeing the truth here. They want to keep Lincoln in a box. They want him to be the simple American hero. But he was much more than that. He was a product of a global history that we are only just beginning to understand. The numbers are staggering. If you took 10,000 random people from the street today, only 5 of them would share this DNA with Abraham Lincoln. It makes him one of the most genetically unique presidents we have ever had. The crazy part is that this information was hidden for over 2 centuries. It took the invention of supercomputers and advanced genetic sequencing to finally reveal it. This discovery has turned the world of genealogy upside down. It shows that even the most famous people in history still have secrets waiting to be found in their blood. But as we look closer at Lincoln's own life, we see that he might have sensed he was different all along. Words kept from public record. Abraham Lincoln was a man who lived in his own head a lot. He was famous for being very quiet and having long bouts of sadness. A lot of people think this was because of the Civil War, but it started long before that. His law partner, William Herndon, wrote a lot about Lincoln's private life. He said that Lincoln was obsessed with his mother's ancestry. One day, while they were traveling in a buggy to a court case, Lincoln started talking about it. He told Herndon that his mother was the daughter of a nobleman from Virginia. He believed that his own intelligence and his ambition came from that side of the family. He felt like he had been born with something special that didn't come from the simple Lincoln line. He was actually ashamed of his father, Thomas. He thought Thomas was lazy and lacked brains, but he worshipped the memory of his mother. He famously said that everything he was, or hoped to be, he owed to his angel mother. But there were still many rumors in the air during his lifetime. People in Kentucky and Indiana whispered that Nancy Hanks was not a respectable woman. They talked about her being illegitimate. This haunted Lincoln. He was a man who cared deeply about his reputation. He worked his way up from nothing to become a lawyer and then a politician. In those days, your family name was everything. If people knew his mother was born out of wedlock, it could have ruined his career. So, he kept it buried. He never spoke about it in public. But here is the deal. His intuition was actually right. He knew there was something different about his mother's side. He just didn't have the science to explain what it was. He thought it was about a Virginia nobleman, but the truth was much bigger. It was about a rare genetic heritage from the other side of the planet. What most people realize now is that Lincoln's noble blood wasn't just about a title or money. It was about an ancient and rare lineage that gave him a unique perspective. He was a man of the people, but he was also a man apart. This genetic discovery adds so much weight to his story. It shows that the disturbing part of his ancestry wasn't a scandal at all. It was a miracle of survival. The fact that this rare DNA made it through the centuries to produce a man who would lead America through its darkest hour is incredible. Many are confused about why Lincoln would be so secretive if he didn't know the full truth. But back then, any mystery in your family tree was seen as a weakness. He was protecting his future. He was building a legend. And that legend was based on the idea of the self-made man. But we now know that he had a lot of help from his ancestors, even if he didn't know their names. This is one of the most interesting parts of his character. He felt the pull of the past even though he was focused on the future of the country. Now we have to wonder if there are other secrets hiding in the DNA of our most famous leaders. Truth about Lincoln ancestry. The story of Abraham Lincoln's mother's DNA is far more than a footnote in a history book. It is a profound reminder that history is never truly finished, nor is it ever as simple as the black and white photographs suggest. We often walk through life under the impression that the facts of our past are settled, locked away in vaults, or etched into granite monuments. But then a single microscopic discovery comes along and shatters the entire frame. The revelation of the rare X1C mitochondrial DNA marker in Lincoln's maternal line is that kind of discovery. It serves as a jagged, undeniable link between the rugged American frontier and the ancient, sun-drenched Levant. It connects the drafty floorboards of a Kentucky log cabin to the shifting desert sands of the Middle East, spanning thousands of miles and thousands of years in a single strand of genetic code. This is the messy, beautiful reality of the human story. We are all significantly more connected than we care to admit. Yet a vast portion of society remains obsessed with the sanitized idea of pure lineages and neat, predictable backgrounds. Lincoln's blood proves that we are all a walking collection of mysteries, a mosaic of ancestors who traveled paths we can barely imagine. The fact that the 16th president, the man who arguably defines the American character more than any other, carried such a rare and unexpected genetic signature is a devastating blow to anyone who thinks history follows a straight, logical line. For decades, the ancestry of Nancy Hanks was a source of endless speculation and, at times, quiet embarrassment for the Lincoln family. Rumors of illegitimacy and low-born roots swirled around her like a fog. However, the 2015 study didn't just clear the fog, it replaced it with a lightning strike. By tracing the mitochondrial DNA, the DNA passed down strictly from mother to child, researchers found that Nancy Hanks belonged to the X1C haplogroup. To put this in perspective, this lineage is virtually non-existent in the traditional European populations that were supposed to have settled the American colonies. It is a signature of the Druze, the Lebanese, and the Palestinian territories. It has opened up a whole new way of looking at the Lincoln family, solving a 150-year-old mystery about who Nancy's mother was. But in doing so, it has birthed 1,000 new questions about how that DNA survived the journey from the cradle of civilization to the backwoods of the Virginia colony. There are theories now emerging that would have been dismissed as madness only 20 years ago. If we accept the science, we have to account for the migration. One of the more compelling, albeit wild theories, suggests that Lincoln's maternal ancestors weren't part of the standard British migration at all, but were instead part of a much older, clandestine movement of people. Some researchers are now looking toward the Melungeons, a mysterious group of triracial isolates found in the Appalachian Mountains. For centuries, these people claimed they were Portuguese or Moorish, often to avoid the harsh racial laws of the time. If the Hanks line was tied to these groups, it suggests that Middle Eastern or North African explorers, perhaps fleeing the Spanish Inquisition or sailing with early Mediterranean trade fleets, arrived in the Americas and melted into the wilderness long before the Mayflower ever sighted land. We are talking about a secret history of America, where the pioneers were actually the descendants of ancient mariners who had already been living in the hills for generations. The implications of the X1C marker go even deeper if you consider the Phoenician theory. The Phoenicians were the greatest sailors of the ancient world, hailing from the very region where this DNA is most concentrated. There has always been a fringe theory that Phoenician ships reached the Americas millennia ago, trading for copper and gold. If a small group of these sailors stayed behind or were shipwrecked, their genetic legacy would be a rare, ghost-like presence in the population, exactly like the X1C marker found in Lincoln's mother. Imagine the narrative shift. Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, might have carried the blood of the ancient world's first great explorers, a lineage that crossed the Atlantic when the Roman Empire was still in its infancy. This isn't just about genealogy. It's about a fundamental rewriting of the American identity. It suggests that the melting pot wasn't something that started in New York Harbor in the 1800s, but was a process that had been boiling in the woods of the South for centuries, hidden from the official records. Furthermore, we have to look at Lincoln himself. Throughout his life, people commented on his unusual physical appearance. He was gaunt, exceptionally tall, with deep-set, melancholic eyes and a facial structure that many of his contemporaries described as exotic or even Egyptian. Some historians have tried to attribute this to Marfan syndrome or other medical conditions. But what if his physical otherness was simply the manifestation of this ancient Levantine heritage. There are whispers in the dark corners of historical research that Lincoln was well aware of his strange blood. He was famously secretive about his mother's side of the family, once telling his law partner William Herndon that his mother was the illegitimate daughter of a well-bred Virginia farmer. But what if that was a cover story? What if the disturbing truth he sensed was that his family didn't fit into the narrow boxes of 19th century racial categories? In a time when whiteness was the only currency of citizenship, carrying the blood of the Middle East would have been a dangerous secret to hold, especially for a man with presidential ambitions. The Druze connection adds another layer of high-octane mystery. The Druze are a secretive, a monotheistic religious group in the Levant known for their belief in reincarnation and their fierce independence. If Lincoln's DNA traces back to this specific group, it raises questions about how such a niche genetic marker traveled so far. Some suggest the lost tribes theory, that members of the ancient tribes of Israel migrated into Europe and then the Americas, carrying these rare markers with them. Others wonder if the Hanks family were descendants of Sephardic Jews who had converted to Christianity during the Inquisition, but kept their genetic heritage intact. This would make Lincoln a descendant of the very people who wrote the Bible he used to swear his oath of office. It's a staggering irony. The man who saved the New Jerusalem of America may have been genetically linked to the original Jerusalem of the Old World. What many can confirm is that the Lincoln story is now more complex and more fascinating than ever. The truth is, we are only scratching the surface of what DNA can tell us about our past. When you look at the iconic portraits of Lincoln now, those haggard, weary eyes staring back from the 1860s, you aren't just seeing a frontier lawyer who made it big. You are seeing a man who carried the code of ancient survivors, explorers, and perhaps even outcasts in his very marrow. He wasn't just a pioneer in the sense of clearing trees and building cabins. He was a global citizen before the term even existed, a biological bridge between the ancient East and the modern West. This discovery should make us rethink everything we know about the American lineage. If someone as thoroughly documented and scrutinized as Abraham Lincoln can harbor a genetic secret of this magnitude, what is hiding in your own family tree? Most people walk around with a vague idea of their heritage based on a few stories from a grandparent, but science is proving that those stories are often just the sanitized versions of a much wilder reality. We are the products of migrations, wars, and secret romances that have been erased from the ledger of history, but remain written in our cells. The disturbing truth about Lincoln's ancestry isn't that it's scandalous in a negative way. It's that it's so much more expansive than the narrow parochial history we were taught in school. It suggests that the American frontier was a place where the world's DNA came to hide and reinvent itself. We are currently seeing a surge in people looking into the ancestors of other presidents, and the results are bound to be just as disruptive. We like to think of our leaders as pure representatives of the people, but history is rarely that clean. The X1C marker is a reminder that the past is alive and well, pulsating inside us. It is a blow to the idea of exceptionalism and a testament to the idea of human universality. Lincoln's blood tells a story of survival, of a gene that traveled from the Levant, perhaps through the Mediterranean, into the heart of Europe, across the Atlantic, and into the Appalachian wilderness, surviving poverty, illness, and war, until it culminated in the man who would end slavery. It is a journey of thousands of years that ended in a theater in Washington, D.C. Ultimately, the facts don't lie, even if the history books do. Abraham Lincoln was truly one of a kind, not just because of his intellect or his rhetoric, but because he was a biological anomaly. A man whose very existence challenged the boundaries of his time. We should embrace this mystery rather than fear it. The rare DNA of Nancy Hanks isn't a complication to the Lincoln legacy. It is the key to understanding it. It reminds us that the greatest figures in history are often the ones who come from the most unexpected places, carrying the weight of a world much older than the one they are trying to change. History isn't a closed book. It's a living, breathing organism. And as we continue to peer into the microscopic details of our past, we will likely find that we are all, like Lincoln, the descendants of ghosts and explorers. Do you think Lincoln's rare DNA influenced his personality and leadership during the war? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.